Chapter 26, Part 2 of Social Statics by Herbert Spencer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Social statics, or the conditions essential to human happiness, specified, and the first of them developed, by Herbert Spencer. 8. Did the reader ever watch a boy in the first heat of a gardening fit? The sight is an amusing and not uninstructive one. Probably a slice of a border, some couple of square yards or so, has been made over to him for his exclusive use. No small accession of dignity and not a little pride of proprietorship does he exhibit. So long as the enthusiasm lasts, he never tires of contemplating his territory, and every companion and every visitor with whom the liberty can be taken is pretty sure to be met with the request, "Come and see my garden." Note chiefly, however, with what anxiety the growth of a few scrubby plants is regarded. 3 or 4 times a day will the little urchin rush out to look at them. How provokingly slow their progress seems to him. Each morning on getting up he hopes to find some marked change, and lo, everything appears just as it did the day before. When will the blossoms come out? For nearly a week has some forward bud been promising him the triumph of a first flower, and still it remains closed. Surely there must be something wrong. Perhaps the leaves have stuck fast. Ah, that is the reason, no doubt. And so, 10 to 1, you shall some day catch our young florist very busily engaged in pulling open the calyx, and it may be trying to unfold a few of the petals. Somewhat like this childish impatience is the feeling exhibited by not a few state educationists. Both they and their type show a lack of faith in natural forces, almost an ignorance that there are such forces. In both there is the same dissatisfaction with the ordained rate of progress, and by both artificial means are used to remedy what are conceived to be nature's failures. Within these few years, men have all at once been awakened to the importance of instructing the people. That to which they were a while since indifferent or even hostile has suddenly become an object of enthusiasm. With all the ardor of recent converts, with all a novice's inordinate expectations, with all the eagerness of a lately aroused desire, do they await the hoped-for result, and with the unreasonableness ever attendant upon such a state of mind, are dissatisfied, because the progress from general ignorance to universal enlightenment has not been completed in a generation. One would have thought it sufficiently clear to everybody that the great changes taking place in this world of ours are uniformly slow. Continents are upheaved at the rate of a foot or two in a century. The deposition of a delta is the work of tens of thousands of years. The transformation of barren rock into life-supporting soil takes countless ages. If any think society advances under a different law, let them read. Has it not required the whole Christian era to abolish slavery in Europe, as far at least as it is abolished? Did not 100 generations live and die while picture writing grew into printing? Have not science and commerce and mechanical skill increased at a similarly tardy pace? Yet are men disappointed that a pitiful 50 years has not sufficed for thorough popular enlightenment. Although within this period an advance has been made far beyond what the calm thinker would have expected, far beyond what the past rate of progress in human affairs seemed to prophesy, yet do these so impatient people summarily condemn the voluntary system as a failure. A natural process, a process spontaneously set up, a process of self-unfolding which the national mind had commenced, is pooh-poohed because it has not wrought a total transformation in the course of what constitutes but a day in the life of humanity. And then, to make up for nature's incompetency, the unfolding must be hastened by legislative fingerings. 9. There is indeed one excuse for attempts to spread education by artificial means, namely, the anxiety to diminish crime, of which education is supposed to be a preventive. We hold, says Mr. Macaulay, that whoever has the right to hang has the right to educate. And in a letter relative to the Manchester district system, Miss Martineau writes, "Nor can I see that political economy objects to the general rating for educational purposes. As a mere police tax, this rating would be a very cheap affair. It would cost us much less than we now pay for juvenile depravity." In both which remarks this prevalent belief is implied. Now, with all respect to the many high authorities holding it, the truth of this belief may be disputed. We have no evidence that education, as commonly understood, is a preventive of crime. Those perpetually reiterated newspaper paragraphs in which the ratios of instructed to uninstructed convicts are so triumphantly stated prove just nothing. Before any inference can be drawn, it must be shown that these instructed and uninstructed convicts come from two equal sections of society, alike in all other respects but that of knowledge, similar in rank and occupation, having similar advantages, labouring under similar temptations. But this is not only not the truth, it is nothing like the truth. The many ignorant criminals belong to a most unfavourably circumstanced class, whilst the few educated ones are from a class comparatively favoured. As things stand, it would be equally logical to infer that crime arises from going without animal food, or from living in badly ventilated rooms, or from wearing dirty shirts. For were the inmates of a jail to be catechised, it would doubtless be found that the majority of them had been placed in these conditions. Ignorance and crime are not cause and effect. They are coincident results of the same cause. To be wholly untaught is to have moved amongst those whose incentives to wrongdoing are strongest. To be partially taught is to have been one of a class subject to less urgent temptations. To be well taught is to have lived almost beyond the reach of the usual motives for transgression. Ignorance, therefore, at least in the statistics referred to, simply indicates the presence of crime-producing influences, and can no more be called the cause of crime than the falling of a barometer can be called the cause of rain. So far, indeed, from proving that morality is increased by education, the facts prove, if anything, the reverse. Thus we are told in a report by the Rev. Joseph Kingsmill, head chaplain of Pentonville Prison, that the proportion borne by the educated to the uneducated convicts is fully as high as that which exists between the educated and the uneducated classes in the general population. Although, as just explained, we might reasonably expect that, having had fewer temptations, the educated convicts would bear a smaller ratio to their class. Again, it has been shown from government returns that the number of juvenile offenders in the metropolis has been steadily increasing every year since the institution of the Ragged School Union, and that whereas the number of criminals who cannot read and write has decreased from 24,856 in 1844 to 22,968 in 1848, or no less than 1,888 in that period, the number of those who can read and write imperfectly has increased from 33,337 to 36,229, or 2,857 in the same time. Morning Chronicle, April 25, 1850. Another contributor to the series of articles on labor and the poor, from which the above statement is quoted, remarks that the mining population in the North are exceedingly low in point of education and intelligence, and yet they contradict the theories generally entertained upon the connection of ignorance with crime by presenting the least criminal section of the population of England. Morning Chronicle, December 27, 1849. And speaking of the women employed in the ironworks and collieries throughout South Wales, he says, "Their ignorance is absolutely awful, yet the returns show in them a singular immunity from crime." Morning Chronicle, March 21, 1850. If these testimonies are thought insufficient, they may be enforced by that of Mr. Fletcher, who has entered more elaborately into this question than perhaps any other writer of the day. Summing up the results of his investigation, he says: 1. In comparing the gross commitments for criminal offences with the proportion of instruction in each district, there is found to be a small balance in favour of the most instructed districts in the years of most industrial depression, 1842-4, but a greater one against them in the years of less industrial depression, 1845-7, while in comparing the more with the less instructed portions of each district, the final result is against the former at both periods, though fourfold at the latter what it is at the former. 2. No correction for the ages of the population in different districts to meet the excess of criminals at certain younger periods of life will change the character of this superficial evidence against instruction, every legitimate allowance of the kind having already been made in arriving at these results. 3. Down to this period, therefore, the comparison of the criminal and educational returns of this, any more than of any other country of Europe, has afforded no sound statistical evidence in favour, and as little against, the moral effects associated with instruction as actually disseminated among the people. To all which evidence may be added that of Messrs. Guerin and Dupin, who have shown that the most highly educated districts in France are the most criminal districts. The fact is that scarcely any connection exists between morality and the discipline of ordinary teaching. Mere culture of the intellect, and education as usually conducted amounts to little more, is hardly at all operative upon conduct. Creeds pasted upon the memory, good principles learnt by rote, lessons in right and wrong, will not eradicate vicious propensities, though people, in spite of their experience as parents and as citizens, persist in hoping they will. All history, both of the race and of individuals, goes to prove that in the majority of cases precepts do not act at all. And where they seem to act, it is not by them, but by pre-existing feelings which respond to them, that the effects are really produced. Intellect is not a power, but an instrument, not a thing which itself moves and works, but a thing which is moved and worked by forces behind it. To say that men are ruled by reason is as irrational as to say that men are ruled by their eyes. Reason is an eye, the eye through which the desires see their way to gratification. And educating it only makes it a better eye, gives it a vision more accurate and more comprehensive, does not at all alter the desires subserved by it. However far-seeing you make it, the passions will still determine the directions in which it shall be turned, the objects on which it shall dwell. Just those ends which the instincts or sentiments propose will the intellect be employed to accomplish, culture of it having done nothing but increase the ability to accomplish them. Probably some will urge that enlightening men enables them to discern the penalties which naturally attach to wrongdoing, and in a certain sense this is true, but it is only superficially true. Though they may learn that the grosser crimes commonly bring retribution in one shape or other, they will not learn that the subtler ones do. Their sins will merely be made more Machiavellian. If, as Coleridge says, a knave is a fool with a circumbendibus, then by instructing the knave you do but make the circumbendibus a wider one. Did much knowledge and piercing intelligence suffice to make men good, then Bacon should have been honest, and Napoleon should have been just. Where the character is defective, intellect, no matter how high, fails to regulate rightly, because predominant desires falsify its estimates. Nay, even a distinct foresight of evil consequences will not restrain when strong passions are at work. How else does it happen that men will get drunk, though they know drunkenness will entail on them suffering and disgrace, and, as with the poor, even starvation? How else is it that medical students who know the diseases brought on by dissolute living better than other young men are just as reckless and even more reckless? How else is it that the London thief, who has been at the treadmill a dozen times, will steal again as soon as he is at liberty? How else is it that people who have all their lives long been taught Christianity will not behave as Christians, though they believe that dire penalties are entailed by behaving otherwise? It is indeed strange that, with the facts of daily life before them in the street, in the counting house, and in the family, thinking men should still expect education to cure crime. If armies of teachers, regarded with a certain superstitious reverence, have been unable to purify society in all these 18 centuries, it is hardly likely that other armies of teachers, not so regarded, will be able to do it. If natural persuasion, backed by supernatural authority, will not induce men to do as they would be done by, it is hardly likely that natural persuasion alone will induce them. If hopes of eternal happiness and terrors of eternal damnation fail to make human beings virtuous, it is hardly likely that the commendations and reproofs of the schoolmaster will succeed. There is, in fact, a quite sufficient reason for failure, no less a reason than the impossibility of the task. The expectation that crime may presently be cured, whether by state education, or the silent system, or the separate system, or any other system, is one of those utopianisms fallen into by people who pride themselves on being practical. Crime is incurable save by that gradual process of adaptation to the social state which humanity is undergoing. Crime is the continual breaking out of the old unadapted nature, the index of a character unfitted to its conditions, and only as fast as the unfitness diminishes can crime diminish. To hope for some prompt method of putting down crime is in reality to hope for some prompt method of putting down all evils, laws, governments, taxation, poverty, caste, and the rest. For they and crime have the same root. Reforming men's conduct without reforming their natures is impossible, and to expect that their natures may be reformed otherwise than by the forces which are slowly civilizing us is visionary. Schemes of discipline or culture are of use only in proportion as they organically alter the national character, and the extent to which they do this is by no means great. It is not by humanly devised agencies, good as these may be in their way, but it is by the never-ceasing action of circumstances upon men, by the constant pressure of their new conditions upon them, that the required change is mainly effected. Meanwhile, it may be remarked that whatever moral benefit can be effected by education must be effected by an education which is emotional rather than perceptive. If, in place of making a child understand that this thing is right and the other wrong, you make it feel that they are so, if you make virtue loved and vice loathed, if you arouse a noble desire and make torpid an inferior one, if you bring into life a previously dormant sentiment, if you cause a sympathetic impulse to get the better of one that is selfish, if, in short, you produce a state of mind to which proper behavior is natural, spontaneous, instinctive, you do some good. But no drilling in catechisms, no teaching of moral codes can effect this. Only by repeatedly awakening the appropriate emotions can character be changed. Mere ideas received by the intellect, meeting no response from within, having no roots there, are quite inoperative upon conduct, and are quickly forgotten upon entering into life. Perhaps it will be said that a discipline like this, now described as the only efficient one, might be undertaken by the state. No doubt it might. But from all legislative attempts at emotional education, may Heaven defend us. 10. Yet another objection remains. Just as we found on close examination that by poor laws a government cannot really cure distress, but can only shift it from one section of the community to another, so, astounding as the assertion looks, we shall find that a government cannot, in fact, educate at all, but can only educate some by uneducating others. If, before agitating the matter, men had taken the precaution to define education, they would probably have seen that the state can afford no true help in the matter. But having unfortunately neglected to do this, they have confined their attention solely to the education given at school, and have forgotten to inquire how their plans bear upon the education which commences when school days end. It is not indeed that they do not know this discipline of daily duty to be valuable, more valuable in fact than the discipline of the teacher. You may often hear them remark as much, but with the eagerness usual amongst schemers, they are so absorbed in studying the action of their proposed mechanism as to overlook its reaction. Now, of all qualities, which is the one men most need? To the absence of what quality are popular distresses mainly attributable? What is the quality in which the improvident masses are so deficient? Self-restraint, the ability to sacrifice a small present gratification for a prospective great one. A laborer endowed with due self-restraint would never spend his Saturday night's wages at the public house. Had he enough self-restraint, the artisan would not live up to his income during prosperous times and leave the future unprovided for. More self-restraint would prevent imprudent marriages and the growth of a pauper population. And were there no drunkenness, no extravagance, no reckless multiplication, social miseries would be trivial. Consider next how the power of self-restraint is to be increased. By a sharp experience alone can anything be done. Those in whom this faculty needs drawing out, educating, must be left to the discipline of nature, and allowed to bear the pains attendant on their defective character. The only cure for imprudence is the suffering which imprudence entails. Nothing but bringing him face to face with stern necessity, and letting him feel how unbending, how unpitying are her laws, can improve the man of ill-governed desires. As already shown, all interposing between humanity and the conditions of its existence, cushioning off consequences by poor laws or the like, serves but to neutralize the remedy and prolong the evil. Let us never forget that the law is adaptation to circumstances, be they what they may, and if, rather than allow men to come in contact with the real circumstances of their position, we place them in artificial, in false circumstances, they will adapt themselves to these instead, and will in the end have to undergo the miseries of a readaptation to the real ones. Of all incentives to self-restraint, perhaps none is so strong as the sense of parental responsibility, and if so, to diminish that sense is to use the most effectual means of preventing self-restraint from being developed. We have ample proof of this in the encouragement of improvident marriages by a poor law, and the effect which a poor law produces by relieving men from the final responsibility of maintaining their children must be produced in a smaller degree by taking away the responsibility of educating their children. The more the state undertakes to do for his family, the more are the expenses of the married man reduced at the cost of the unmarried man, and the greater becomes the temptation to marry. Let not any think that the offer of apparently gratuitous instruction for his offspring would be of no weight with the working man deliberating on the propriety of taking a wife. Whoever has watched the freaks which strong passion plays in the councils of the intellect has marked how it will bully into silence the weaker feelings that oppose it, how it will treat slightingly the most conclusive adverse evidence, whilst in urging the goodness of its own cause, trifles light as air are confirmations strong as proofs of Holy Writ. Whoever has marked this can hardly doubt that, in the deliberations of such an one, the prospect of public training for children would in no small degree affect the decision. Nay, indeed, it would afford a positive reason for giving way to his desires. Just as a man at an expensive dinner will eat more than he knows is good for him, on the principle of having his money's worth, so would the artisan find one excuse for marrying in the fact that unless he did so he would be paying education rates for nothing. Nor is it only thus that a state education would encourage men to obey present impulses. An influence unfavorable to the increase of self-control would be exercised by it throughout the whole of parental life. That powerful restraint which the anxiety to give children schooling now imposes upon the improvident tendencies of the poor would be removed. Many a man who, as things are, can but just keep the mastery over some vicious or extravagant propensity, and whose most efficient curb is the thought that if he gives way it must be at the sacrifice of that book learning which he is ambitious to give his family, would fall, were this curb weakened, would not only cease to improve in power of self-control as he is now doing, but would probably retrograde and bequeath his offspring to a lower instead of a higher phase of civilization. Hence, as was said, a government can educate in one direction only by uneducating in another, can confer knowledge only at the expense of character. It retards the development of a quality universally needed, one in the absence of which poverty and recklessness and crime must ever continue, and all that it may give a smattering of information. What a contrast is there between these futile contrivances of men and the admirable silent working mechanisms of nature. Nature, with a perfect economy, turns all forces to account. She makes action and reaction alike useful. This strong affection for progeny becomes in her hands the agent of a double culture, at once to fashion parent and child into the desired form. And beautiful is it to see how the most powerful of instincts is made the means of holding men under a discipline to which perhaps nothing else could make them submit. Yet this skilfully devised arrangement statesmen propose to dislocate, confidently opining that their own patent apparatus will answer a great deal better. 11. Thus, in the present, as in other cases, we find the dictate of the abstract law enforced by secondary considerations. The alleged right to education at the hands of the state proves to be untenable. First, as logically committing its supporters to other claims too absurd for consideration, and again as being incapable of definition. Moreover, could the claim be established, it would imply the duty of government despotically to enforce its system of discipline, and the duty of the subject to submit. That education ought not to be dealt in after the same manner as other things, because in its case the interest and judgment of the consumer are not sufficient security for the goodness of the commodity, is a plea with most suspicious antecedents, having been many times employed in other instances and many times disproved. Neither is the implied assumption that the interest and judgment of a government would constitute a sufficient security admissible. On the contrary, experience proves that the interests of a government and of all the institutions it may set up are directly opposed to education of the most important kind. Again, to say that legislative teaching is needful because other teaching has failed presupposes a pitiably narrow view of human progress, and further involves the strange skepticism that, though natural agencies have brought the enlightenment of mankind to its present height, and are even now increasing it at an unparalleled rate, they will no longer answer. The belief that education is a preventive of crime, having no foundation either in theory or fact, cannot be held an excuse for interference. And to crown all, it turns out that the institution so much longed for is a mere dead machine, which can only give out in one form the power it absorbs in another, minus the friction, a thing which cannot stir towards effecting this kind of education without abstracting the force now accomplishing that, a thing, therefore, which cannot educate at all. End of Chapter 26, Part 2.